I've always had a complicated relationship with my cousin Alex. We grew up in the same neighborhood, attended the same schools, and even shared many of the same friends. But there was always this unspoken distance between us. I came out to my family when I was 19, and while most were supportive, Alex seemed to struggle with it the most. Not in an openly hostile way, but in that awkward, slightly uncomfortable manner that makes you hyper-aware of your differences. Over the years, we developed a cordial relationship, the kind where we'd chat at family gatherings, but rarely seek each other out. That's why I was surprised when he invited me to his housewarming party last month. "It's just a small get-together," he said, "with some close friends and family." I hesitated, but ultimately decided to go. Maybe this was his way of extending an olive branch, and I wasn't going to reject it. When I arrived at Alex's new apartment, it was already buzzing with energy. Music pulsed through the speakers, laughter echoed from different corners, and the distinct smell of beer and pizza filled the air. I recognized a few faces, some relatives, a couple of mutual friends from high school, but most were strangers to me. Alex spotted me from across the room and waved me over, a genuine smile spreading across his face. That's when I first noticed him, standing next to Alex, holding a beer and laughing at something someone had just said. He had this effortless presence, the kind that draws your attention without demanding it. "Jamie, this is my best friend, Ethan," Alex introduced us. "Ethan, this is my cousin Jamie I've told you about." I extended my hand, and Ethan took it, his grip firm but not overpowering. "The famous Jamie," he said with a warm smile. "Alex talks about you all the time." I raised an eyebrow at my cousin, who shrugged and muttered something about needing to check on other guests before walking away. Let me tell you about Ethan. He wasn't conventionally handsome in that magazine cover way, but there was something undeniably attractive about him. He had these expressive hazel eyes that seemed to change color depending on the light, dark brown hair that curled slightly at the ends, and a smile that created the most perfect dimple on his right cheek. He was wearing a simple navy blue button-up shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing forearms that suggested he spent some time at the gym. But it wasn't just his physical appearance that caught my attention. It was the way he listened when people spoke, how he seemed genuinely interested in what they had to say. As the night progressed, I found myself gravitating toward Ethan's conversations. He worked as an architectural engineer, loved hiking on weekends, and had a soft spot for old sci-fi movies, facts I collected throughout the evening from various group discussions. I wasn't actively seeking him out, or at least that's what I told myself, but somehow we kept ending up in the same conversational circles. There was this moment, around midnight, when our eyes met across the room, and he gave me this small, almost private smile that made my stomach do a little flip. I quickly looked away, reminding myself that he was my straight cousin's best friend, and I was setting myself up for disappointment. The party started winding down around 1 in the morning. People began calling Ubers, saying their goodbyes, and collecting their belongings. I was helping Alex clean up some of the empty bottles when Ethan approached us, a look of frustration on his face. "My Uber driver just canceled on me," he groaned, staring at his phone. "And the next available one isn't for another 40 minutes. Alex, who had clearly had a few too many drinks, suggested Ethan crash on his couch, but then remembered he hadn't set it up yet since moving in. The apartment was still half-furnished, with boxes scattered around and minimal sleeping arrangements. "I can give you a ride," I offered before I could stop myself. "I only had 1 beer hours ago, and I'm completely fine to drive." Ethan looked relieved, but then hesitated. "Are you sure? I live on the other side of town, and it's pretty late." I assured him it wasn't a problem, secretly pleased at the prospect of spending more time with him. Alex thanked me profusely, giving me a hug that felt more genuine than any we'd shared in years. "You're the best, Jamie," he slurred slightly. "Take care of my boy Ethan, okay?" I promised I would, ignoring the way my heart raced at his choice of words. The night air was crisp as we walked to my car, a comfortable silence between us. I unlocked the doors, and Ethan slid into the passenger seat, immediately commenting on how clean my car was compared to Alex's mobile trash can, as he called it. That made me laugh, and suddenly the slight awkwardness of being alone together dissipated. As I started driving, Ethan directed me through the city streets, occasionally pointing out buildings he admired or had worked on. His passion for architecture was evident in the way his voice became more animated when discussing design elements I'd never even noticed before. We were about halfway to his place when it happened. A sudden downpour, the kind that seems to come out of nowhere and turns roads into rivers within minutes. The visibility became terrible, and I had to slow down significantly. Maybe we should pull over and wait it out, Ethan suggested, concern evident in his voice. I nodded, pulling into the parking lot of a closed convenience store. The rain hammered against the roof of my car, creating a rhythmic backdrop to our conversation. So, Ethan said, turning slightly in his seat to face me better, how come I've never met you before? Alex mentions you pretty often. I raised my eyebrows, genuinely surprised. Really? What does he say? Ethan smiled, that dimple appearing again. Good things, mostly. He admires you, you know. Says you're the bravest person in your family. I felt a warmth spread through my chest at those words. Alex and I had never discussed my coming out after it happened. He had simply retreated into awkwardness. The idea that he spoke about me with admiration to his friends was unexpected and touching. We haven't always been close, I admitted, especially after I came out. I think he didn't know how to act around me anymore. Ethan nodded thoughtfully. He mentioned that too. Said he regrets not being more supportive. There was a moment of silence as I processed this information, the rain continuing its steady rhythm around us. What about you? I asked, partly to change the subject and partly out of genuine curiosity. Any cousins you've accidentally alienated? Ethan laughed, and the sound filled the car, making it feel warmer somehow. He told me about his family, 2 older sisters who still treated him like he was 12, parents who had been married for 35 years and still held hands when they walked, a grandmother who insisted on setting him up with her friends' granddaughters despite his protests. Not interested in being set up? I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. Ethan shrugged. It's not that. I don't know. Dating has been complicated lately. There was something in his voice, a hesitation that made me wonder, but I didn't push. The rain showed no signs of letting up, and as we continued talking, I noticed Ethan checking his phone repeatedly. Everything okay? I asked. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Not really. My roommate just texted that our power is out because of the storm. And apparently, there's some minor flooding in our building's lobby. He looked out at the rain, then back at me, a mix of embarrassment and hope in his expression. I hate to ask this, especially since we just met, but is there any chance I could crash at your place tonight? Just until the morning. I can sleep on the floor or whatever. My heart started racing again, but I tried to keep my expression neutral. Of course, I said, hoping I sounded more casual than I felt. I have a spare bedroom you can use. No need for the floor. The relief on his face was immediate and genuine. Thank you so much, Jamie. I owe you big time. I waved off his thanks, already adjusting my mental plans for the night and following morning. It's no problem at all. That's what friends of cousins are for, right? That made him laugh again, and I decided I really liked being the cause of that sound. I redirected my route toward my apartment. The rain still pouring, but my visibility slightly better now that I knew where I was going. Ethan called his roommate to let him know he wouldn't be coming home, and I couldn't help but notice how he described me. I'm staying at Alex's cousin's place. Yeah, Jamie. He's a really nice guy. The simple pronoun affirmation shouldn't have made me feel as good as it did, but there was something special about being referred to correctly by someone who had just met me, without any awkward pauses or corrections. When we finally reached my apartment building, we made a mad dash from the car to the entrance, getting soaked despite the short distance. We were both laughing as we entered the elevator, clothes dripping and hair plastered to our foreheads. Well, that was refreshing, Ethan joked, shaking his head like a dog and sending water droplets flying. Hey, I protested, shielding my face, but laughing too. There was something about being caught in the rain together that had broken down any remaining barriers between us, creating a sense of shared adventure. My apartment wasn't anything special, a one-bedroom with a small den that I had converted into a guest room/office, but I had always taken pride in making it feel like home. Warm lighting, comfortable furniture, walls adorned with photographs I'd taken during my travels. This is nice, Ethan said, looking around appreciatively. Very you. I raised an eyebrow. You've known me for all of 5 hours. How do you know what's very me? He smiled, that dimple appearing again. I'm a good judge of character. Plus, Alex has mentioned your photography hobby. I offered him some dry clothes, a t-shirt and sweatpants that would probably be a bit short on him, but better than his wet ones. While he changed in the bathroom, I quickly tidied up the guest room, making the futon into a bed and finding extra blankets and pillows. I also changed into dry clothes, trying not to think about Ethan doing the same just a few feet away. When he emerged from the bathroom, my clothes did indeed look slightly too small on him, the sweatpants ending above his ankles and the t-shirt hugging his shoulders more tightly than it ever had on me. I tried not to stare. Do you want something to drink? I have tea, coffee, water, probably some beer in the fridge, I offered, leading him to the kitchen. He opted for tea, saying it might help warm him up after the rain. As I put the kettle on, a comfortable silence fell between us. Ethan leaned against the counter, watching me move around the kitchen. You know, he said suddenly, Alex was right about you. I glanced at him, curious. What did he say this time? Ethan's expression was soft, almost vulnerable. That you're genuinely kind. Not everyone would take in a stranger on a rainy night. You're hardly a stranger, I pointed out, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the steaming mugs of tea I was preparing. You're my cousin's best friend. That's practically family in some cultures. He chuckled, accepting the mug I handed him. Well, thank you anyway. I really appreciate it. Our fingers brushed during the exchange, and I felt that same flutter in my stomach from earlier at the party. I quickly moved to the living room, suggesting we sit on the couch while we drank our tea. The rain continued to pound against the windows as we settled onto opposite ends of my sofa, each cradling our mugs. Ethan asked about the photographs on my walls, and I found myself telling him about my trips to national parks, my fascination with landscape photography, and my dream of one day having my work featured in a gallery. He listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions that showed he was genuinely interested. When I finally ran out of things to say about my photos, I turned the conversation to him. So, architectural engineering? How did you get into that? His face lit up as he talked about his passion for creating spaces that were both functional and beautiful, how he'd been drawing building designs since he was a kid, and the project he was currently working on, a community center that incorporated sustainable materials and natural light. As he spoke, he gradually shifted position on the couch, moving closer to my end, his hands gesturing animatedly to illustrate his points. I found myself mirroring his movement, leaning in to better hear him over the rain, until we were sitting side by side, our knees occasionally brushing. The conversation flowed easily, jumping from work to childhood memories to favorite movies. We discovered a shared love for 80s sci-fi films, debating the merits of Blade Runner versus Alien with playful intensity. At some point, I noticed that hours had passed, and it was now approaching 4 a.m. We should probably get some sleep, I suggested reluctantly, not really wanting our conversation to end. Ethan nodded, stifling a yawn. Yeah, you're right. I've kept you up way too late. I showed him to the guest room, explaining how the futon worked and where to find extra blankets if he needed them. The bathroom is right across the hall, and I'm just through that door if you need anything, I said, pointing to my bedroom. Ethan thanked me again, his expression sincere. This has been really nice, Jamie. Not just the place to stay, but talking with you. There was something in his voice, a warmth that made me wonder if I was reading too much into it. I've enjoyed it too, I replied honestly. Good night, Ethan. I retreated to my own room, closing the door behind me and leaning against it for a moment. What was I doing? Developing feelings for my straight cousin's best friend was a recipe for disappointment. And yet, there had been moments throughout the night when I thought I'd caught him looking at me with something more than friendly interest, times when our conversations seemed charged with unspoken possibilities. I shook my head, trying to dismiss these thoughts as I got ready for bed. It was late, I was tired, and my imagination was running wild. I had just settled under my covers, the sound of rain still pattering against my window, when there was a soft knock at my door. My heart jumped to my throat as I called out, "Yes." The door opened slightly, and Ethan's silhouette appeared in the gap. "Sorry to bother you," he said, his voice quieter than it had been all night. I can't seem to fall asleep. My mind keeps racing." I sat up, turning on my bedside lamp. "Everything okay?" I asked, concerned by the troubled expression on his face. He hesitated in the doorway, looking uncertain. "Can I come in for a minute?" I nodded, and he entered, sitting gingerly on the edge of my bed. Up close, I could see the fatigue in his eyes, but also something else, a nervous energy that seemed out of character for the confident man I'd spent the evening with. "I've been thinking about something," he started, then paused, as if searching for the right words. "Actually, I've been thinking about it for a while, but tonight, talking with you, it just made it more clear." My pulse quickened, but I remained silent, giving him space to continue at his own pace. He took a deep breath. "I've been struggling with some things lately. Questions about myself, about what I want." His eyes met mine, vulnerable and searching. "Alex doesn't know this, but I've been questioning a lot of things. About who I am. About who I'm attracted to." The implications of his words hung in the air between us, heavy with potential meaning. I swallowed hard, not wanting to assume anything, but feeling a spark of hope I couldn't suppress. "That sounds challenging," I said carefully, wanting to be supportive without pushing. Ethan nodded, looking down at his hands. "It is, especially when you've spent your whole life thinking you're one way, and then suddenly realizing there might be more to it." He looked up at me again, his expression both fearful and determined. "I've never told anyone this before, not even Alex, but there's something about you that makes me feel like I can be honest." The rain seemed to grow louder in the silence that followed his words, filling the space between us with its steady rhythm. "I'm honored that you feel you can trust me," I said finally, meaning it completely. "And whatever you're going through, questioning parts of your identity, it's okay. It's normal. And it takes courage to face those questions." Something in my words seemed to release a tension in him, his shoulders visibly relaxing. "Thank you," he said softly. I don't know what to do with these feelings. They're new and scary and exciting all at once." He laughed nervously. "And I definitely didn't plan on having this conversation tonight, with someone I just met. But something about being here, with you, it feels right." My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. I wanted to reach out to him, to offer some physical comfort, but I was afraid of crossing a line. "I know this is weird," Ethan continued, "and you can absolutely say no, but would it be okay if I just stayed here for a while? Not in any way I just don't want to be alone with my thoughts right now." The vulnerability in his request touched something deep within me. I understood that feeling all too well, the need for human connection when your own mind becomes too overwhelming. "Of course," I said, shifting over to make room beside me on the bed. "You can stay as long as you need to." Ethan hesitated for just a moment before moving to sit beside me, his back against the headboard. We sat there side by side, not touching but close enough to feel each other's presence, listening to the rain. After a few minutes of comfortable silence, he spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "Can I ask you something personal? About when you came out?" I nodded, turning slightly to face him better. "How did you know? That you were gay, I mean. Was it something you always knew, or did it hit you suddenly?" It was a question I'd been asked before, but never in such an intimate setting, never by someone who might be asking for reasons beyond mere curiosity. I took my time answering, wanting to be honest and helpful. "It wasn't a single moment for me," I explained. "More like a series of realizations that finally came together. There were signs throughout my childhood, crushes on male teachers, a lack of interest in girls when all my friends were obsessed with them, but I didn't have the language for it then." Ethan listened intently as I continued. "I think I started to really understand around 16 or 17. And even then, I tried to ignore it for a while. It wasn't until college that I finally accepted it and came out." I paused, studying his face. "Everyone's journey is different, though. Some people know from a very young age. Others don't figure it out until much later in life. And some people discover they're bisexual or pansexual, attracted to multiple genders in different ways." He nodded thoughtfully, processing my words. "I think that's what confuses me the most," he admitted. "I've dated women. I've been attracted to women. But lately, I've started noticing men too, in a way I never allowed myself to before." He glanced at me, then quickly away. Or maybe I always noticed, but I just buried it so deep I couldn't acknowledge it. The courage it took for him to share this with me, someone he'd just met, was not lost on me. It was a sacred trust, and I felt determined to honor it. "That's completely valid," I assured him. "Sexuality can be fluid for some people, and it's okay to discover new aspects of yourself at any age." I hesitated, then added gently, "And whatever you discover about yourself, it doesn't invalidate your past experiences or feelings." He seemed to relax a little more at my words, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Thank you for listening," he said, "and for not making me feel weird about any of this." We continued talking, the conversation flowing from sexuality to broader topics of identity and self-discovery. As the night deepened, our positions shifted naturally, becoming more comfortable with each other's presence. At some point, Ethan's head came to rest against my shoulder, his exhaustion finally catching up with him. I remained still, not wanting to disturb this newfound closeness, even as my arm began to tingle with numbness. "Jamie," he murmured, his voice heavy with approaching sleep. I responded softly. There was a pause, and then, "Would it be okay? I mean, would you mind if I stayed in your arms? Just for a little while?" The request, so simple and yet so profound, made my heart swell with emotion. "Yes," I whispered, shifting to make it easier for him. "That would be okay." Slowly, carefully, we rearranged ourselves. I lay back against the pillows, and Ethan moved into my embrace, his head resting on my chest, one arm draped tentatively across my waist. I wrapped my arm around his shoulders, holding him gently, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing. It was an intimacy I hadn't expected, but one that felt incredibly right. Not sexual, but deeply connected, two people finding comfort in each other's presence during a moment of vulnerability. The rain continued its gentle percussion against the windows, creating a cocoon of sound around us. I felt Ethan's body gradually relax, his breathing becoming deeper and more even as he drifted toward sleep. I allowed myself to enjoy the weight of him against me, the warmth of his body, the faint scent of my shampoo in his hair. There was a rightness to it that transcended the newness of our acquaintance, as if we'd known each other in some other life. "Thank you," Ethan murmured, his words slurring slightly with encroaching sleep. "For everything." I tightened my arm around him slightly in response, not trusting my voice. Within minutes, his breathing had evened out completely, and I knew he was asleep. I lay awake a while longer, marveling at the strange turns life can take, how a missed Uber and a rainstorm had led to this unexpected intimacy with someone who, just hours ago, had been a stranger. I must have fallen asleep eventually, because the next thing I knew, morning light was filtering through my curtains, and the rain had stopped. Ethan was still in my arms, though we'd shifted during the night. Now we were both on our sides, his back pressed against my chest, my arms still draped over him. For a moment, I allowed myself to enjoy the closeness, the simple pleasure of waking up next to another person, before the complexities of the situation reasserted themselves in my mind. As if sensing my wakefulness, Ethan stirred, turning slightly to look at me over his shoulder. There was a moment of confusion in his eyes, quickly replaced by recognition, and then, to my relief, a soft smile. "Morning," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "Morning," I replied, suddenly uncertain about the protocol for this situation. Should I move away? Pretend this was completely normal? Before I could decide, Ethan solved the dilemma by sitting up, running a hand through his tousled hair. "I should probably apologize for last night," he said, not meeting my eyes. "For dumping all of that on you, and then this." He gestured vaguely at the bed, at our proximity. I sat up too, wanting to reassure him. "You don't need to apologize. Really, I'm glad you felt comfortable enough to talk to me, and—" I hesitated, then decided to be honest. I didn't mind this either. That made him look at me, really look at me, his hazel eyes searching my face for something, sincerity, perhaps, or judgment. Whatever he was looking for, he seemed to find it, because his expression softened. "Still, it's a lot to put on someone you just met. But thank you for listening, for understanding." There was a pause, filled with unspoken questions and possibilities. Then Ethan glanced at the clock on my bedside table and grimaced. "I should probably get going. I need to check on my apartment, see if the power's back on." I nodded, trying to ignore the disappointment that settled in my chest. "Of course. Do you want to borrow some clothes? Or I can throw yours in the dryer if they're still damp." He opted for the dryer, and we fell into a morning routine that felt strangely domestic for two people who had known each other less than 24 hours. I made coffee while he showered, then showed him how to use the dryer while I took my turn in the bathroom. By the time I emerged, dressed and somewhat more awake, Ethan was in the kitchen, 2 mugs of coffee on the counter. "I hope you don't mind," he said, pushing one toward me. I figured you could use this as much as I could. I accepted the mug gratefully, our fingers brushing in the exchange. There was a new awareness between us, a tension that hadn't been there before his confession, before we'd spent the night in each other's arms. We sipped our coffee in companionable silence, both seemingly reluctant to break the bubble of intimacy we'd created. Finally, Ethan spoke. I should tell you what I said last night about questioning things. I haven't really talked about that with anyone before, not even a therapist or anything. He looked down into his coffee, as if searching for words in its depths. It's all still very new to me, and I'm not sure what it means yet. But being with you last night, talking to you, it helped. More than I can express. I felt a warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the coffee. I'm glad, I said simply. And if you ever want to talk more about it, I'm here. He looked up at me then, his expression a complex mix of gratitude, uncertainty, and something else I couldn't quite identify. I'd like that, he said softly. Maybe we could get dinner sometime? As friends, he added quickly, though there was a question in his eyes that belied the casualness of his words. I'd like that too, I replied, trying to keep my own tone neutral despite the hope blooming in my chest. We exchanged phone numbers, the simple act somehow charged with significance. When Ethan's clothes were dry and he was ready to leave, there was an awkward moment at my door, both of us unsure how to say goodbye after the intimacy we'd shared. Finally, he stepped forward and hugged me, a brief but warm embrace that held the promise of more to come. Thank you again, he said as he pulled away, his hands lingering on my shoulders for just a moment longer than necessary. For everything. I smiled, suddenly shy under the intensity of his gaze. Anytime. I mean it. He nodded, seeming to understand all the things I wasn't saying. With one last smile, he turned and walked down the hallway toward the elevator, glancing back once before he disappeared from view. As I closed my door, I leaned against it, my mind replaying the events of the night. A missed Uber, a rainstorm, an unexpected confession, and a night spent in each other's arms. It all seemed too serendipitous to be mere coincidence. I didn't know what would happen next with Ethan, whether our dinner would lead to more dinners, more conversations, more moments of connection. I didn't know if his questioning would lead him to discover a part of himself that could include me, or if our night together would remain a beautiful, isolated moment of vulnerability and trust. What I did know was that something had shifted in both of us during those hours together. Something had been acknowledged, explored, and gently set free to grow in whatever direction it needed to. And for now, that was enough. The memory of his weight in my arms, his trust in my understanding, and the possibility of more to come. These were gifts I hadn't expected but would cherish, regardless of where our paths led from here. As I moved through my apartment, straightening the guest room that had gone unused and gathering the mugs from the kitchen, I found myself smiling. Life had a funny way of bringing people together, of creating connections where none had existed before. And sometimes, a missed Uber could lead to the most unexpected and beautiful of destinations. Total _char_count, 17,946.